So it may sound kind of far-fetched that they are blaming witches for these kind of things, this unseen character, and living in a fantasy world, wearing feathers on their head and dancing around half naked. There are people in the United States that have suits worth several $1,000s that think, or at least say, climate change is a hoax. That, in fact, school shootings are a hoax. That the pandemic that we're going through right now is a hoax. Humanity is humanity around the world. The environment that we're in teaches us how to express that humanity. Witchcraft continued. More contemporary. Wicca, or Wiccan, a pagan religion that claims descent from a pre-Christian or pre-Inquisition time based on respect for nature and life. And that would be a modern-day witch. They do practice spells. The spells in witchcraft or in Wicca would be to manipulate yourself. The idea, let's use the example of a love spell. I want so-and-so to fall in love with me because I love them so much. So I do a spell to make them fall in love. That's what you would call negative magic. That's manipulating somebody else. I talked about it in an earlier slide. To do what you want. In Wicca, the appropriate thing would be to do the spell to create a change within yourself to make yourself ready for the relationship you're looking for. In this, the one law, I guess you could say, is if it harm none, do what you will. It's a nature religion. It respects life as sacred and the planet as sacred. Ritual. Ritual is behavior that is formalized, is regularly repeated, and has symbolic content. Rituals are universal. When we're talking about religious rituals, what we're talking about is the reenactment of myth or the sacred stories that reinstill the cosmology in the inherent or inherents. You can do a ritual by yourself. A prayer is a ritual. A meditation is a ritual. When you go into those places, you're reliving the myth or what the myth says can happen. And you can do that with yourself, or you can do it with a group of people where you come together in a ritual or a ceremony that brings the same outcomes. The reinstallment or reenacting, reinstilling the cosmology, the characters, the landscapes, the events, and what that means to you in this material world into your world, into your worldview. Rituals occur in two major categories of ceremonies across cultures. They rites of passage and rites of intensification. Rites of passage. This is from Arnold van Gennep, and he says there are three phases. The rites of passage. Separation. Individuals are removed from your community or from their status in the community. The liminal stage is transformation. The stage when one has passed out of an old status but not yet entered into a new one. And then the reincorporation. Participants are returned to their community with a new status. An example I like to use for this is marriage. Marriage, you are two single people. The individuals are removed from society and prepared for the ceremony. Then they go into the ceremony. They're in the liminal stage. They're in the process of becoming married. A married couple. They are finished with the ceremony. They come out and reincorporate themselves into society as man and wife, man and man, wife and wife, as a married couple. Here's the rite of passage.
The boy gets to be, a little bit ungovernable. One fine day, the men come in, and they're naked except for stripes of white down that have been stuck on their bodies in stripes with their men's blood. They use their own blood for gluing this on. and they're swinging the bull roarers, which are the voice of the spirits, and they come as spirits. The boy will try to take refuge with his mother. She'll pretend to try to protect him. The men just take him away, and mother's no good from then on, you see. He's no longer a little boy.
He's removed from his normal status in community.
Really through an ordeal. These are the rites, you know, of circumcision, subincision, and
the whole purpose is to
turn him into a member of the tribe.
And a hunter.
And a hunter.
Because that was the way of life.
Yeah, but most important is to live according to the needs and values of that tribe. He is initiated in a short period of time into the whole culture context of his people.
So what about the female? I mean, most of the figures in the temple caves are male. Was this a kind of secret society for males?
When he talks about the temple caves, they're going back 20,000 years, 30,000 years, talking about the temple caves, and we saw pictures of those where the animal forms are on the walls, and I talked about it as being like a temple or a church with stained glass windows. So it was thought, Campbell postulated, that in fact this was a place of a coming of age for boys to men, because they would go to the bowels of the earth where the animals come from, metaphorically, right? But now he's saying that when we look in those caves, when we look 20,000 years ago, we don't find clues that might lead us to what a woman's coming of age ceremony is, and he's going to explain that now.
It wasn't a secret society. It was that the boys had to go through it. Now, we don't know exactly what happens with the female in this period, because we have very little evidence to tell us. In primary cultures today, the girl becomes a woman with her first menstruation. It happens to her. I mean, nature does it to her. And so she has undergone the transformation. And what is her initiation? Typically, it is to sit in a little hut for a certain number of days and realize what she is.
How does she do that?
She sits there. She's now a woman. And what is a woman? A woman is a vehicle of life. And life has overtaken her. She is a vehicle now of life. Woman's what it's all about. The giving of birth and the giving of nourishment. She's identical with the earth goddess in her powers. And she's got to realize that about herself. The boy does not have a happening of that kind. He has to be turned into a man and voluntarily become a servant of something greater than himself. The woman becomes the vehicle of nature. The man becomes the vehicle of the society, the social order, and the social purpose.
And I would speculate that as societies get larger and as societies begin to compete for who can hoard resources, that the violence in the society, that men rise to the top and it becomes a patriarchy because of the drives of the social order in communities that are struggling to hoard resources. And so what's the solution to that? Stop hoarding resources. Bring males and females back into balance, bring society back into balance, bring humans back into cooperation with each other. Rites of intensification, rituals directed towards the welfare of the group or community rather than the individual, structured to reinforce the values and norms of a community and to strengthen group identity. Group social and political status relationships. In some groups, they are connected with totems. Let's take a look at this film. This is a rite of intensification. A priestess must kiss this cobra on the head 3 times to bring rain. Now, I'm not sure that kissing this cobra on the head 3 times would actually change meteorology and bring rain. But for the people of that community to watch their representative go up and go through this trial, this test to bring rain and to come back down, it would certainly reduce anxiety. Let's take a look.
Now, I saw a fantastic thing of a Burmese priestess, a snake priestess, who had to bring rain to her people by calling a king cobra from his den and kissing him 3 times on the nose. There was the cobra, the giver of life, the giver of rain, which is of life, as a divine, positive, not negative figure.
The Christian story has turned it around because the serpent was the seducer.
Well, but what that amounts to is a refusal to affirm life. Life is evil in this view. Every natural impulse is sinful unless you've been baptized or circumcised in this tradition that we've inherited, for heaven's sakes.
The interpretation of the myth was done in the Inquisition times to create control and dominance over the population. Revitalization movements. Revitalization movements often arise during times of perceived crisis, such as a loss of traditional cultural values or a time of economic stress. A charismatic leader will articulate a specific concern for the people. And this is where a prophet comes in. A prophet is a person who has direct communication with God and often receives messages that articulate a plan for the group. They appear in a community, religious organizations that have a priest, imam, rabbi, and that type of status quo. The reason being, shamanic cultures, foraging cultures, they aren't stuck in the status quo. But larger cultures that are based on agriculture are maintaining the dominance hierarchy, the status quo of the dominance hierarchy. In a dominance hierarchy, those at the top are very unaware of what those at the bottom are going through, so it can cause a lot of problems, crises, economic stress. So at some point, the status quo being maintained needs to be broken, and that's where a prophet comes in. You won't find prophets in foraging communities, but you will find them in large-scale communities that practice agriculture, because what that prophet is doing is voicing the suffering and the needs of the people not being represented.